You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. Welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. This week, I'm delighted to welcome back the ever enthusiastic Allison Jornlin to the show. Allison has just launched a fantastic new YouTube channel, Paranormal Women, A Hidden History. Allison has already released a couple of episodes, the first focusing on the woman who brought the zombie into the paranormal lexicon, Zora Neale Hurston, before her career and achievements disappeared for the best part of 50 years. The second episode features the woman who, in my humble opinion, is the most neglected paranormal writer and researcher of all time, Catherine Crowe. We dive into Catherine's career, her writings, the scandal that dogged her later years, and the legacy her work left. We look at her incredible book, The Night Side of Nature, as well as the careers of Alexandra David-Neel, the woman who brought the mysteries of Tibet, including Tulpas and two more, to a Western audience for the first time, and Zora Neale Hurston's contribution to the paranormal field with her work on voodoo, hoodoo, and zombies. There are links to everyone we cover in our discussion, and as I mentioned in the show, I can't recommend Catherine Crowe's book, The Night Side of Nature, enough, so the free PDF link is also in this week's show notes, so make sure you download a copy of that. A massive thank you to Allison for joining me for this most enlightening and enjoyable conversation. Don't forget, you can send me your ghost stories for our special Halloween edition to mysteriesandmonsters@gmail.com. Don't forget to head it Ghost Story for me to notice it in the inbox. You can also support us by signing up for our Patreon for early releases and extra content all the way through to the end of the year. The show notes will give you the links that you need to sign up for $4 today. You can also find us on all social media. We're Mysteries and Monsters on Facebook and Mystery Monsters on Twitter and Instagram. Art for this week's show, as always, by my brother Dean Bestel. The show is produced by Brennan Stowe of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now, let's join Allison to discuss some forgotten titans of paranormal investigation. Today, I am delighted to welcome back Allison Jornlin, founder of American Ghost Walks. Allison has just launched a fantastic new YouTube channel, Paranormal Women, A Hidden History. Allison is shining a light on some of the forgotten trailblazers in the fields of the paranormal and parapsychology. Allison's enthusiasm and diligent research is always infectious, and I am delighted to welcome you back to Mysteries and Monsters. How are we, Allison?
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. I'm just so excited to be here, and I always enjoy talking to you. So thanks again for having me back on.
Hey,
I'm doing great.
Good.
How are you doing?
Hey, we're all right, you know. So, yes, we've had a very strange summer, and it seems that it's decided to turn up today here in England. So, it's hot and humid here in the UK today.
Oh, really? That's it. That's exciting. It's starting to get cold here in Wisconsin already. So I think summer has passed. But no matter what the weather or what the pandemic situation, you always have YouTube. So I'm going to talk about my new YouTube channel today. I got really bummed out. I had a lot of conference appearances planned for 2020, but they either got canceled or shifted to, virtual presentations. And so it's really fun for me to get out there and meet people. Of course, we're not able to do that now, but I thought, well, one of my most popular presentations that I do is called Paranormal Women, A Hidden History. And so I thought, you know what? I could really get into more depth about some of these amazing paranormal researchers that are largely unsung. I could really delve deep into their amazing stories if I started a YouTube channel. So it's a case of being able to deliver more than I would be able to in an hour presentation. So, that was my response to the pandemic, is having a good idea, is thinking, well, okay, all right, I can't do the presentations I had planned this season, but I can certainly offer some of those same stories and even more in detail on a YouTube channel. So I started a YouTube channel, and that's what we're here to talk about today. The YouTube channel is called Paranormal Women, A Hidden History, and you can search that right now to see the episodes I've released so far, or link to them from I have a Facebook site, facebook.com/Fortean-Writer. So you can check out the video links on there as well if you can't find it on YouTube yet.
Well, as someone that's watched everything you've uploaded so far, I'm delighted to see that you're shining a light, as I mentioned on the introduction, on some of these forgotten heroines and trailblazers from years gone by. And I think it's important because for me, I find it quite frustrating sometimes, because as someone that's got, I'm not trying to show off and say, oh, look at me, but as someone that's got quite an extensive library of paranormal books, I've got books by Harry Price and Montague Summers and M.R. James, and I've always had a real appreciation for sort of the dawn of ghost investigation and the birth of paranormal and spiritualism, because it was such an interesting and intriguing time, because a lot of people were coming to grips with an appreciation of science, sort of going hand in hand with religious beliefs, and obviously the rise of spiritualism towards the end of the 19th century as well. I think primarily driven a lot by, especially on your side of the Atlantic, due to the horrific losses of the Civil War, I think, Alison. So it's very interesting that here we are 200 years later, and I think a lot of people just don't view this period with either any interest or have any knowledge about it.
Yeah, or they kind of scoff at it, I think. Especially, I think people scoff at the spiritualist, and they really shouldn't do, because when you really look into spiritualist history, for example, you find a lot of people who were really ahead of their time, and really what they wanted to do in spiritualism is apply science to religious belief and test emanations of the spiritual with science. And beyond that, a lot of these people that we may malign because maybe they didn't recognize photographic frauds with the ability that we can today. But that's really a small thing when compared to their progressive beliefs, because people in the spiritualist community were often abolitionist. They often were suffragist. Wanted women and people of all races to have equal rights. And that was really at a time when everybody thought that was stupid.
Yes.
So just imagine going against the grain like that, and believing that everyone is a sacred being and should be treated as such, no matter their color or their gender. And so when we look back at spiritualism, that's something that I really want people to keep in mind, that these people were really the vanguard of progressive views about humanity, and so we shouldn't be so quick to scoff at them. We should really uphold them for being the leaders of the human heart that they were. Yeah, so when we don't understand history, we don't have an appreciation for, those who have gone before, the people who really built the stepping stones, for the shoulders of giants, if you were. We don't see the shoulders of giants that are raising us up. And I think we really need to have an appreciation of that, especially in the paranormal world, because I see today, people thinking that paranormal TV, for example, is is the forefront of paranormal research. They know nothing about current parapsychology, which is also a blind spot. Beyond that, they don't understand that it's not chiefly men who were involved in the paranormal or who are even paranormal leaders today. A lot of the people you see on reality TV, kind of exude this machismo about, I'm going to go get me some ghosts. I'm going to knock some heads, some ghostly heads. That's used to be, what we're dealing with here.
Yes.
And that wasn't traditionally the approach. And, of course, there were many, many men that made wonderful contributions in paranormal research. But their work is generally better known than, some of the women that really laid the foundation for paranormal research as we know it.
I think it is one of those things, because I think as the 19th century progressed, because as you've touched on, there was always that kind of belief or train of thought that as if allowing a woman to gain an education was a dangerous thing, and it could lead to all kinds of trouble. And it's very interesting when you look back from the start of the 19th century, and I've mentioned this previously, Alison, when I've talked to other people, you can kind of put a fix on it from Mary Shelley releasing Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, because essentially when that book came out, she didn't put a name to it because she was told nobody would buy a book written by a woman, or that they wouldn't believe that a woman could create such a horrific story. And I think it took 3 years for the publishers to eventually add her name to the book, because it was just being copied left, right and centre, and she was losing out hundreds and hundreds of pounds through sales because this book was just being ripped off. So as the 19th century progressed, it's very interesting, as you refer to, that these people and women were coming forward with new ideas and a new approach to certain matters, and it was good to get a different perspective, I suppose, as well, because they seem to be coming from a different angle of using their knowledge for the betterment of others rather than to show their superiority.
Oh, yes. I think that's key. In the women that I've studied so far, yes, they're very egalitarian. They're very much about just getting out the information, not grandstanding. They just want these topics, which have also been neglected, to be seriously researched. And that's the case with Catherine Crowe. This is Catherine Crowe is the woman who got me going and looking into finding out what other women had contributed to the paranormal field. I had for a long time, and I still am, been a big fan of Charles Fort.
Yes.
Who, he's from the early 20th century, but he was a writer and researcher who searched through sources in the New York Public Library and accumulated the strangest stories he could find. And then he came up with 4 books, The Book of the Damned, New Lands, Low, and Wild Talents. Coming out in 1919, 1923, 1931, 1932, respectively. And they're all available online for free, by the way. And a lot of the resources we're going to be talking about today are. So anyway, Charles Fort has been called the father of the paranormal. So I got to thinking, well, who is the mother of the paranormal? If there's a father, there's got to be a mother.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you don't have both sides, then you're really lopsided. So, you're really not getting the full picture, only getting half of it. So I learned about Catherine Crowe. And I'm like, who is this Catherine Crowe character? And I had heard she had written this book called The Night Side of Nature, which is also available freely online through many different sources, including Project Gutenberg. Yeah. And it is 19th century language, which can be a bit of a stumbling block for people, I think, because they're used to our modern style of writing, but it's very relevant. The content is very relevant even today, and you can do what I did. I have a print copy of the book, but also because it's available by PDF, I was able to download it and then put it into a voice reader. And then I programmed a British female voice, which to me epitomizes Catherine. And I have her read to me from her book, The Night Side of Nature. And it's really accessible when you have it read to you. So especially in that wonderful English accent, which I can't get enough of. So if you're having trouble reading the print book, that's what I could suggest for you. So her book, The Night Side of Nature, came out in 1848. But the reason that she got so interested in the paranormal was, she was really a trailblazing polyglot. She was one of the people that I wish we had today in the paranormal, because she was reading literature from other countries, not just England. She was born in Kent, England, but she could read French and German. So she was constantly voraciously reading sources from other countries. And that's where she came upon some amazing discoveries by German researchers. And so in 1845, she put out a book called the Series of Prevorst, which now this book was a translation, an English translation of Dr. Justinus Kerner's work, and he was a famous doctor in Germany who had a patient who started exhibiting these extraordinary powers, and he was taking care of her because he was a doctor and she was very, very sickly. But in his visits to her, he was just blown away by her ability to predict the future, for example, and to be able to communicate with the dead in these trance states that she would go into because of her failing health. And when Catherine Crowe read this book in the original German, she's like, I got to translate that book. Now, it's just amazing that to me. Sadly, I only speak English right now. I'm hoping that in the next 50 years of my life, I'm able to take on another language, because I think we really need to be citizens of the world and learn what there is to be learned in other countries as well. So that's another reason that Catherine Crowe is an inspiration to me, because she was first inspired by reading the literature in other countries. And then, so in 1848, she came out with her own book called The Night Side of Nature. And there's everything in here from twin telepathy, poltergeists, doppelgangers, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, you name it, it's in here. So I would really recommend the book for everyone who's listening, because it is just a phenomenal resource. And if you know where we've been historically, it can give you a great perspective on where we are now. And you're able to, you'll be able to see where her work still resonates and is still relevant today, and other areas where maybe we have made some significant discovery since 1848. So it's a really good point for it's a place when you read these texts, you get a much clearer view of paranormal research and parapsychology. Yeah. Now you were telling me a story about how you got introduced to Catherine Crowe.
Yes, several years ago I was very fortunate to be shown a copy of Montague Summers's Victorian Ghost Stories, which is not a cheap book to find. I think if you're lucky, you can get a second-hand copy for about £200. if you're lucky. And I was fortunate enough to have a look at it. And Catherine had 2 stories featured in this. I think there were 14 in total, and I believe she's the only woman featured in it. No, sorry, there's an Irish poet whose name escapes me, Catherine Cleary, I believe her name was. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of Catherine Crowe, and I thought, well, who is this woman? I didn't know much about it. And then it was at the birth of the second-hand books being available online. And I stumbled across a copy of The Night Side of Nature. And I was just blown away with it, because there were stories in there and experiences and first-hand accounts that I'd never come across before, Alison. And as you refer to, yes, the language might be a bit difficult, but as someone that battled through Dickens as a teenager,
yes.
Anything after that's pretty easy, really. So, which is also quite interesting, because obviously Dickens was a literary compatriot of her at the time. So,
yes, well, I have got some so, if you'll let me, a little bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was astounded, and I've often been perplexed, to be honest, Alison, because I think anybody who loves the paranormal and has a paranormal library, I can't recommend having this book enough. And as you refer to, it's available online for free as a PDF. You can download it. I got a Kindle version a few years ago, and I checked last night before we did the interview. You can pick up a copy for 49 cents.
Wow.
On Kindle. So I would recommend anybody who's got a spare 49 cents, get yourself a copy of The Night Side of Nature. If you want to stick it on your Kindle, then I recommend it, because the 2 chapters that always stuck with me were the chapter on poltergeists, because, in 1848 she's dealing with terms and language that were completely alien to the British, to the English language.
Right.
And also haunted houses. And the haunted houses has several first-hand accounts with letters published with permission of the authors, and it really is groundbreaking, because she's very balanced. She simply gives us the facts, and I just don't, as you refer to, when I saw that you were doing this series, I was delighted to see that Catherine was someone that you were going to focus on, because for me, I think she's probably the most important forgotten paranormal researcher in history.
Oh, and I would really agree. You were just talking about poltergeists. What most people don't realize is we are always banding about that term, and we don't realize that Catherine Crowe was the one who brought that term into English language usage. And that's the same for doppelganger as well. These concepts were first written about in The Night Side of Nature by Catherine Crowe. And they're so popular today, we don't really, we don't realize their origins or how they even got into the English language. And, without Catherine Crowe, maybe we would have had to wait even longer. But, she was on the pulse. I mean, she was really out there reading about all these amazing German discoveries and wanted to make sure that they weren't lost to the English-speaking world. And that's why she talked about those things in The Night Side of Nature. And I agree that, she's really, as I said before, the mother of the paranormal, and it is so neglected. So in 1854, she would conduct the first paranormal investigation to my mind. I mean, I'm putting this out there hoping that, if someone has more information, or if they're like, no, there was an earlier one than 1854, I'd love to know about that. But to my mind, as a researcher, this was the first investigation of a haunted house. So because she went into the haunted house with the express idea of perhaps contacting the spirits there or having some experience there, but documenting it with other witnesses. And, that's very much what we see still in paranormal research today. When someone does a quote unquote paranormal investigation, they will often go to a haunted location, a purportedly haunted location, let's say, and they'll focus on the area of highest activity, and they will see if they can create some kind of connection with the spirit. Now, her book, The Night Side of Nature, came out in 1848, and that was just at the time, like just right before the spiritualist movement got underway in the United Kingdom. The spiritualist movement had started here in the U.S. in New York in 1847, but it would really reach the UK in 1848, and it was the perfect time for her to publish The Night Side of Nature. As the spiritualist movement was coming up, people were discovering her book, and it just went hand in hand. Although, she wasn't originally a spiritualist, she would very much become interested in spiritualism as time went on. But what she did with her first ghost hunt in 1854, to my mind, that was different than what you see in spiritualist circles, because spiritualism is a religion, the central belief being that the spirits of the dead are still here, and anyone can access them, so you don't have to go to a specific location because they're all around us. But so it was interesting that she found out about a haunted house in Edinburgh, Scotland, and she arranged with the owner to be able to investigate. Now, she had, of course, found out about it because of The Night Side of Nature. She was meeting with a lawyer for other reasons, but when he found out that she wrote The Night Side of Nature, he, of course, told her about his haunted house, which was a charming 3-story house in Edinburgh that he was just never able to let. I mean, he would make the rent as low as possible, and he was never able to keep anyone because many of the tenants felt that the house, or many or all of the tenants felt that the house was haunted, and they weren't able to stay there for any long duration of time. Yeah. So she was able to convince him to open up the doors to her, and so she went along with 2 other women, 2 other men. So now when she went, she had these other witnesses with her, and one of the other witnesses was actually a clairvoyant. But this person only exhibited clairvoyance under what she called mesmerism or magnetism, which we know as hypnosis at the time. So this is something that I'd like to see brought back into paranormal investigations. You don't usually see investigators being put into altered states to communicate with the spirits, but that's what they did with this clairvoyant. Now, they didn't tell her it was haunted. They told her, hey, there's this cool house that we're thinking of buying, and we want you to go along, and we're going to hypnotize you there, and we just want to see, what kind of read you get on the house under hypnosis. Do you think it's a good buy or not? So they actually took her into the first floor. The back parlor of the first floor was the area that had been reported to the lawyer who owned the house as the area of the most activity. So they took her there, and someone in the group hypnotized her, and then they started to ask her, well, what do you think of the house? Should we buy it? And she said, absolutely not. There are the spirits of 2 dead people who were murdered, not in the current house, but on a former house, which took up this part of the same footprint. So they were murdered at this location in the past, and they will trouble you. So that was the first thing that the clairvoyant came out with. So that was interesting to them. And then of course, nothing happened for a long time. They're just sitting there. The only thing that they all witnessed was they had the door to the back parlor standing ajar, and they noticed like a clanging sound of two pieces of iron being struck together loudly coming from near the door. And they couldn't find any explanation for that sound. So they heard that sound and then again just sat there in the darkness. There's no electricity at this time in 1854. And so then they decided, well, we have some candles lit. Let's blow out all the candles. So we're in complete darkness. And so as they did so, they began to see faint light. And the clairvoyant actually startled and said, there, look there. And so at this point, no one was seeing what she was seeing. And these were lights, waves of light, faint but white, coming up from the floor. And so she reached out for Catherine Crowe's hand, and at the moment that she reached out for her hand, they could see, or I shouldn't say they, it was the clairvoyant and just Catherine Crowe. So this power to see the lights was transferred to Catherine Crowe, and she began to see these waves of light coming up from the floor. And then she asked the clairvoyant to squeeze her hand as the lights came up, because they were coming up in intervals of like 2 to 3 seconds or so. Interesting to me, because that seems like the heartbeat of the house, you know, when I'm visualizing it. So Catherine Crowe wordlessly was able to share this communication with the clairvoyant, where the clairvoyant would squeeze her hand every time the lights came up, and Catherine could see that was coinciding with her experience. Now, no one else was able to see these lights. And then suddenly Catherine saw another light. She saw a bright diamond of light materialize like a spark in the center of the room. And she didn't tell anyone about this until after they left the house. So they left the house later on, and then they talked about, you know, what they had experienced. And except for that weird iron clanging sound, nobody was reporting anything except for the lawyer. The lawyer said, well, I saw something, the actual owner of the house. And Catherine Crowe said, well, I saw another light besides the waves of light with the clairvoyant. And he said, oh, wait, was that a light in the middle of the room, like the spark from an oxyhydrogen light? And she said, yes, that's exactly what it looked like. And so it was interesting for her because it wasn't in the way that she had described it to herself, but when he gave her his additional details of the, you know, how the spark looked, then she was able to latch onto that as you know, we experienced something together. We saw this light. So that, as I know it, is the first ghost hunt. Had you ever heard about that story or heard of earlier ghost hunts, Paul?
The only one that I've ever really, I mean, this is the thing as well, because this seems to be the first written account of actually going to a haunted house just to experience a haunted house, whereas the one that always springs to mind where everybody went because they were convinced it was a fraud is the infamous Cock Lane ghost, which is based in here, which essentially was alleged to be a poltergeist, which was found out, which has the wonderful name of Scratching Fanny, was the name of this ghost, and it ended up being the daughter of the tenant who had got boards in her bed, and I think everybody went because they didn't believe it was true, not because they believed it was haunted. They were convinced it was fraud, and it was, unsurprisingly. Now that, I think, was from the early 18th century. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Whereas this seems to be a real investigation where someone's gone, I think I've got a ghost. in an empty house. You know what I mean? It's not somebody
Right.
going, oh, we can't stay here, we're not paying the rent or anything like that. It was a different, for me, I think it probably is the first real investigation, because primary to that, you've got people involved and people are claiming this is happening and that's happening, and nobody really believes them, or it's proved to be false, or we've just got very basic information, Alison, whereas this is a very thorough and specific investigation, in my opinion. So I agree. I think you're probably right.
And I guess you would have. I wish you would have been able to follow up on this and do subsequent investigations, because one of the things she thought about in retrospect is she was like, oh man, why didn't, well, she probably didn't say man, but this is my impression. Oh man, why didn't I ask the clairvoyant to take the hands of the other witnesses that were there to see if the power to see the ghosts or to see whatever these waves of light were could be transferred to others rather than just myself. And she bemoans the fact in a book that she would write in and publish in 1859 called Ghosts and Family Legends. So she does talk about these experiences in a much later book in 1859. And there's also another interesting treatise that she wrote that same year called Spiritualism and the Age We Live In, which is very much about ruminations on the philosophy and the possibilities of the spiritualist movement as a social movement. So those are both interesting books. After you finish The Night Side of Nature, and maybe The Seerist of Prevorst before that, you have two more books. Now, Catherine Crowe is also an amazing novelist. And she actually wrote the first modern detective story in 1841, although, I love Edgar Allan Poe, so don't get me wrong, but he's always the one who is given credit for that first detective story for Murders at the Rue Morgue.
Yes.
And that also came out in 1841, but Catherine Crowe's book was actually a novel, and it came out in January of 1841. It was called The Adventures of Susan Hopley.
Yes.
And so it concerns a maidservant who is forced into a situation where she has to discover a murderer and clear her brother's name. So it's an amazing detective story, and lots of people were influenced by that, and many believe that maybe Poe was influenced by that as well, because it gained quick fame in 1841. Even back here in America, people were talking about it, and then it wasn't until April of that year that Poe would publish The Murders of the Rue Morgue in a magazine. Yes. So we're looking at novel as opposed to magazine short story, and so there's this Poe Award for detective stories, and I think it really needs to be changed to the Crowe Award. And I'd be all for that, or we could say Crowe and Poe, because it rhymes. So, and people love rhymes.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's another thing that she's not given credit for, sadly. But what you said about Mary Shelley is really resonant, because I think a lot of people don't even realize today that Frankenstein, this Frankenstein's monster was created by a teenage girl.
Yes.
And she doesn't get her props. So the other thing I need to mention is, so the reason why Catherine might not have pursued haunting or paranormal investigations further is because something tragic and scandalous happened to her in 1854 as well. So it was, I believe it was early February. It was winter time, so it was probably early February of 1854 that she conducted that first ghost hunt. And then she became very ill, and on February 26th of 1854, something happened which erupted into a huge scandal, which was promoted by none other than, I'm sorry to say, Charles Dickens.
Yes.
Now, do you know about that huge scandal?
I do, and ironically enough, I've actually got a copy of a letter that she wrote trying to suppress it afterwards. But you carry on, and then I will read an excerpt from her letter.
Oh, I would love to hear that excerpt. Yes. So this huge scandal broke around the idea that Catherine Crowe had gone mad due to her interest in spiritualism. And I have to say, well, I mean, perhaps something happened to her as a result of that first ghost hunt. You know, people are always at ghost hunts today trying to protect themselves with the white light and such. And maybe they're not wrong. Maybe that's something that you should do. Or maybe she was just sick. She had a gastric infection, and she was also upset over one of her dearest friends becoming ill. And so she was in a vulnerable state, let's say. And it's possible that what happened is she became so sick with fever that she ran out into the street naked. Yes. Now, this is not, the only person that this has happened to. I mean, certainly people who would succumb to fever would sometimes become so hot that they would just, want to even jump out the window just so they could escape the inferno inside of them. So, but what happened is people began to attribute her brief foray into the streets of Edinburgh nude, which probably lasted minutes. But although we don't have a clear idea of the truth of the matter, let's say, because there's as many as 5 different versions of people coming up with all kinds of crazy variations, that she was out in the street naked because she thought that she was invisible, that the spirits had told her that she could become invisible by holding a handkerchief in one hand and then a calling card in another, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it wasn't a handkerchief, maybe it was an apple, or there were various things that she was supposed to have held in her hand. So, all of these different accounts seem to me to show that there's a dubious nature to the story. That perhaps somebody had it out for her, or had a reason that they were trying to besmirch her name. So, and I think for that we need look no further than, unfortunately, Charles Dickens, who was a great enthusiast about mesmerism or magnetism or hypnosis as we know it today. And he had friends at a publication called Zoist, which was the organ, really, of the magnetist movement. So if you were into magnetism, you read Zoist. Yes. And so Zoist, even before this happened, or they reported on this in 1854, was trying to pin craziness onto spiritualism, was trying to show that if you go for spiritualism, you're going to become a raving maniac. And Catherine Crowe wasn't the first spiritualist that they tried to pin insanity on. And the reason that they were doing this was because magnetism had enjoyed fame for a long time. And then when the spiritualist movement started to rise, what happened to these poor enthusiasts about magnetism, they saw their ranks were lessening at an alarming rate. People who had been adherents to what they were interested in were now jumping on board with spiritualism. Yes. And so they very much felt their spotlight going out, and because of that, they wanted to throw egg on the face of spiritualism in any way that they could. This news item came up saying that, this prominent woman writer had been found crazy wandering in the streets about the spirits. People realized, because the setting was Edinburgh, that this woman, this famous woman, who would write about such matters, they realized it was Catherine Crowe. And then in very similar phrasing, there are at least two letters that were written by Charles Dickens to some of his friends, really blasting Catherine Crowe and saying things like, this is pretty much a quote. She's a spiritualist and an ass, and I don't know what else. Really kind of nasty stuff. And so if you read those letters, you really get a different impression about Charles Dickens. He wrote The Christmas Carol. So I always want to think of him, or I always did want to think of him as this gentlemanly, kind of grandfatherly Englishman. And I can't really think of him as a gentleman anymore because of his approach to Catherine Crowe. And you kind of have to wonder, what happened between them. When The Night Side of Nature came out, in 1848, he gave her glowing reviews. Yes. And then now by 1854, he thinks she's an ass and he has only negative things to say about her. You really wonder what was going on in the mind of that quite infamous philanderer Charles Dickens.
Well, I was about to say Dickens does have a reputation as a bit of a ladies' man, and yes. I think if we look at it, there are probably a couple of explanations for me, because when I first saw that, I was a little taken aback as well, because I didn't know that much about the real Charles Dickens, as it were, because he was a bit of a cad, I think we should call him, in those terms, back in those days. So I would not be surprised that there may have been an attempt by Dickens to seduce Catherine, perhaps because she was not only was she an incredibly intelligent and articulate woman, she was a very strikingly attractive lady as well. And I would not be surprised if Dickens was in the slightest attracted to her because of her intelligence as well as her talent. But also, Dickens was extremely successful in publishing his Christmas stories. I know obviously most people know A Christmas Carol, but Dickens released a story every Christmas. It was a big thing for him. And maybe there was a bit of professional jealousy that the birth of the real ghost story, Alison, could perhaps put an end to the fictional accounts that he did so well, selling every year. And maybe there's a couple of things at play here, because I've often found that odd. There is voluminous in his praise about The Night Side of Nature when it's released. And like you say, 6 years later, he's calling her an idiot.
Yeah, and so much venom.
Yes, and it's very odd because, as you refer to that particular incident that occurred, there is no corroborating newspaper reports in Scottish or English newspapers at the time. All the stories appear after that article in Zeust. Mm-hmm. And Dickens is one of the people that perpetuates this story. There's no sources, and this is the other thing that I've always often found strange about this. There's no source that whoever, it's a friend of a friend of a friend. Mm-hmm. And there's no eyewitnesses, because there is another gentleman who was a neighbour of her, who was, I believe, a barrister called, what was his name? Was it Robert something? Robert Chambers, that's it.
Yes, Robert Chambers.
And he also repeated the story and said, oh yeah, this is what's happened. But he didn't see it either. Now, I've often found that odd, because people go, oh well, clearly something happened. But once again, he didn't see it. He's just repeating, well, I've heard from her friends that this has happened. And as I refer to, Catherine was unaware of this story doing the rounds, as you would do in those days. If you're living in Edinburgh and there's this scandalous story being spread about you in London, you're probably not going to know about it. You know what I mean? It's not going to log on to Facebook or Twitter and see in those days, or pigeons and papers were very centralised in those days. They didn't tend to spread around the country very often. So it was very interesting to see that she'd written this letter. So I'll just read you the letter she wrote.
Great.
Which was in response to the story appearing in a newspaper called the Daily News in April. So once again, it's 2 months after this alleged event, and it says, Sir, I am very sorry to trouble the public about my private maladies or misfortunes, but since the press has made my late illness the subject of a paragraph stating that I have gone mad on the subject of spirit rapping, I must beg leave to contradict the assertion. She's got a wonderful way with words. I have been for some time suffering from chronic gastric inflammation, and after a journey to Edinburgh and a week of considerable fatigue and anxiety, I was taken ill on the 26th of February and was certainly, for 5 or 6 days, not more, in a state of unconsciousness. During this aberration, I talked of spirit rapping and fancied spirits were directing me, because the phenomena, so-called, have been engaging my attention, and I was writing on the subject. But I was not, and am not, mad about spirits or anything else, thank God. Though very much out of health and exceedingly deliberated, I have been residing in London for the last 5 weeks, and am now at Malvern, trying what hydrotherapy will do for me. I should feel greatly obliged by your insertion of this letter, and also, if those journalists who have aided in spreading this erroneous impression will assist in disseminating this corrected statement, which I should have made earlier, but the paragraph did not meet my eye until this very day. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Catherine Crowe.
Yeah, well, that says it, doesn't it? I mean, when you're sick, yes, you might babble. You might become delirious.
Yes.
I mean, people had terrible fevers during this time, and, we didn't have the antibiotics and other medicines that we have today. So yes, I mean, she could have become, quite ill, and it had nothing to do with insanity. Certainly you seem insensible at that time if you're fevered and you're delirious. But, that doesn't mean that you are. And certainly she did respond, and her friends did help her with this. Actually, George Combe, he was a great friend of hers, and he arranged for her to spend some time at an institution for the mentally ill, but it was only for a very short period. So there's an unpublished manuscript by a man named Jeffrey Larkin, and I was able to visit Kent and make my own copy of the unpublished manuscript. And, hopefully I think there's a lot of great stories in there, I should say. And, I'll be bringing some of those stories to my YouTube channel as well, because not everybody can go to Kent and read this voluminous manuscript. But anyway, he was a great, Jeffrey Larkin was a great lover of Crowe, and he was able to find a letter between George Combe and Dr. John Conley, who is the foremost expert in insanity at the time. He had a place called Lawndale, which was actually a private place at his home where he would take care of certain patients, and he admitted her to Lawndale. But interestingly, he worked at Hanwell, I believe it was called, which was a big English institution. But there are no admittance records for Hanwell, which was the mental institution at the time. Yes. There is no admittance for Catherine Crowe at all. The only evidence I have is from this Jeffrey Larkin unpublished manuscript, where his unpublished biography of Crowe, where he talks about this letter between, I believe it was George Combe and Dr. Conley. And Dr. Conley prescribes rest, but says she is not insane. She was just ill, and she just needs some rest and maybe lay off the research for a while. and certainly this huge scandal, which shames Catherine Crowe even today, speaks to the sexism alive at the time. Because really, so what if you're on the street for like a few minutes naked. I mean, you didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And she was able to write many great stories, magazine articles, novels, and, 2 books on the paranormal after this time.
Yeah.
So it shows that, she went on to continue to be a prolific writer, although people may probably ignored her more than they had in the past because of this scandal. And maybe that's why she isn't credited today. Like, for example, in the print edition of The Night Side of Nature, which actually comes from my book that I of choice is the Colin Wilson Library of the Paranormal Edition, where famous writer and researcher Colin Wilson, talks about how Crowe really set the foundation for parapsychological research, that many of the methods that she would use, back in the 1840s, 1850s, later on, like about 50 years later, were incorporated in the Society for Psychical Research. But she doesn't get that credit as being one of these trailblazers. And I think that's really something that we have to get over. I mean, people are still writing today about her going crazy. And it's something that happened for maybe 5 minutes, and then her whole life of literary contributions is overlooked because she was naked for 5 minutes. I guess I just don't understand why that looms so large in people's minds. Who cares?
Yeah, it is very strange, like you say, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, if we want to talk about scandalous characters, Montague Summers has a very dubious reputation, which involves allegations of child molestation and all sorts, and yet people still talk about Summers as though he's some eccentric character. When you dive into his background and his life, he's a very strange and dubious man of character, I'll say that. That's the nicest way. I mean, he was acquitted of it. However, it was something that dogged him all the way through his life.
Right.
And yet most people, unless you dive into Montague Summers, most people do not know that about him at all, Alison. So I think, once again, you've got that kind of focus, because, as you say, she clearly wasn't mentally ill, because she lived another 18 years after this incident. I think she died in Folkestone. I think she returned to Kent towards the end of her life.
That's right.
There was no further instances of this kind of incident. Clearly she was, because, as you say, as someone that's had a fever through tonsillitis, that alone gave me some of the most unusual and lucid dreams I've ever had through an illness. You know what I mean? And that's just having tonsillitis or a basic fever. So it could have been a variety of things. And I think Catherine is someone that really needs to be celebrated as a collector. And before I'll just mention this before we go on to the next wonderful character that I want to discuss with you. I mean, the thing about the Night Side of Nature is it's, even at that age, Catherine had broken the subject down into different sections. So it wasn't just, because I think previously to that it was all ghosts and spirits and everything was collected together. And Catherine's book is one of the first where she's actually sectioned off different types of phenomenon into different chapters, because she's got a wonderful chapter about troubled spirits where she's got first-hand accounts of ghosts coming back to right the wrongs of ancestors and things like that from people, where people have to pay restitution to the local poor because they've stolen their land. So I think she was such a forward-thinking author and investigator that it's a damn shame she's not more well known.
Yeah, absolutely. And, her literary contributions as well. She would also write a version of an edition of Uncle Tom's Cabin for children.
Yes.
So, she was very forward thinking in terms of humanity as well. She was obviously, from the upper echelons of society. This allowed her the mobility that she enjoyed to be able to leave her husband in England and run away to Edinburgh and become an author. She had the friends, she had the connections to be able to, and the status to be able to do that. But in her writing, she often would focus on the downtrodden, the maidservants and such. and try to elevate them in the same light as people of the upper crust. So again, as you say, Montague Summers somehow escapes the scandal, a terrible scandal about molestation, and she's outside maybe naked for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we've all done it.
Yeah, she streaks one time, and that's all anybody knows about her. Come on.
Yeah.
All you need to do is scratch the surface, and you will find just thousands and thousands of pages of her writing and her thought, which still lives on today. So let's bring that back into our collective consciousness.
Very true. Very true. And like I say, if anybody has a love of the paranormal, I can't recommend that book. And for 49 cents, you would be mad not to purchase a copy or download the PDF from the Gutenberg. But I'll put the links in the show notes because I think everybody needs to get hold of a copy of that book because it is brilliant. Right. Now, this next lady she's a force of nature, and that is the incredible force of nature that is Alexandra David-Neel, Alison.
Yes.
Goodness me, is there anything she didn't do?
I know. She would live for over 100 years, so like 101 years almost. And she again was working at this time very early on in the 19th century and then the early 20th century, where she again, a woman, but a woman of some means, but mostly, just through her wit, was able to travel throughout Asia at a time where Westerners were barred from many locations. She was able to sneak in and learn from the Buddhist monks, and she was always a person with some serious wanderlust. I mean, she as a teenager, her family was originally from France, and because of some political unrest, relocated to Belgium, and then she would often run away and just tramp about Europe. And she would then become an opera singer, and this allowed her, again, some mobility, so the ability to get into Asia. And then by the age of 21, she was already in India because of her acclaim as an opera singer. Mm. And then she did marry. And her husband said, well, to get this out of your system, I'm going to finance a trip to Asia. And he thought, maybe she'd be gone for a year. Yeah. And she was gone for 14 years, traveling about Asia.
Incredible.
I know. And would go to many Asian countries in search of Buddhist knowledge. Mm. Now, it's true that she would study in the Theosophist library, but she was not into Madame Blavatsky or, that whole train of thought. Yeah. Yes, they did meet. She did study at the research library, which was a great resource for her when she was learning Sanskrit. Mm. So again, another woman, another researcher who's out there reaching out to other cultures to see what they have to teach. So again, an inspiration for that reason, for not being so insular, but really deciding that, hey, other cultures have something to offer too. So she would get into Tibet, for example, into the city of Lhasa, which was completely forbidden to Westerners. She was able to get in there in 1924, and she was often disguised when she did such things, disguised as a beggar, for example, or she did have a companion who she adopted along the way, a 14-year-old Buddhist monk, and he was in on the con. He was able to pose as her son, and she would do things like, even though she was obviously European, because she had been tramping in the Himalayas in the in the, weather-beaten conditions, she was quite tan. And then she was also aided by ash from the cooking pot.
Yes.
And yak hair. And Chinese ink. She would blacken her hair and lengthen it with extensions that she made out of yak hair, so that she could pose as this mother of this young lama, this young Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
So, I mean, reading these stories, I mean, it's just incredible. She was of the upper crust again, and was at times able to pay servants to help her and her adopted son go to different places, but sometimes they were just by themselves, almost starving out there in the wilderness, nearly starving, eating roasted barley flour, that was their big meal, and buttered tea. That's what they subsisted off of, and sometimes they didn't even have anything. And she loved it just because she got to be out there in that incredible wonderland, which she called the Land of Snows in Tibet. Now, as she was traveling, she would discover psychic phenomena. And in fact, in her book, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, the last chapter is all about psychic phenomena in Tibet and what the Tibetan people think of these phenomena. So, oh man, they mainly consist of powers of the mind. She does talk a little bit about levitation, for instance, and then how that is an exercise that is practiced by some. So, but she said she did say she never witnessed levitation, but she did hear lots of stories of levitation, and she did see that there was this exercise, which is called yogic flying today, which the monks would cross their legs and be able to leap up through the power of their legs. But she said, that wasn't levitation in itself. The whole idea was to practice that so that your body would become lighter and lighter. And then eventually you'd be able to levitate. Now, although she never witnessed levitation itself, she did say that she came upon someone that her adopted son Yongan told her was called a Lungumpa. And so a Lungumpa is a monk who wears heavy chains on his body because they believe that their body has become so light that they are always in danger of floating in the air and just floating off into the cosmos. So she did see at least, well, actually, I'm looking at her book right now, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, and it seems that there were 3 times when she came upon people of that inclination called Lungumpa, and so she would see them, but she never saw any of them levitate. She never captured one and stripped him of his chains and attached a string to him like a helium balloon. I mean, I wish, just like I wish Catherine Crowe would have followed up on her first ghost hunt. I wish that maybe Alexandra David-Neel would have tested some of these things that she saw. Now, she does say that she does not have a credulous nature, but there were things that she admits that she did see. She, of course, says that, this Tibetan landscape is legendary. And so over the centuries, many from China and from India have looked to this remote region and wondered about the spiritual things going on there, the mystery, the magic and the mystery of Tibet, which her book is called. So she says that, a lot of those stories have to be taken with a grain of salt. But she did have her own experience with tulpas, for example. Now, in famously on the X-Files, which maybe many of your listeners are fans of.
Yes.
In one of the newer episodes, Fox Mulder weirdly maligns the word tulpa and says that it has no basis in Tibetan cosmology, and that it's really a misunderstanding by the Theosophists of the term tulku. But this is not true. Tulpa is a concept that does exist in Tibetan thought and is very ancient. Now, the tulku is a reincarnated lama. And, there's a whole system of advancement in Tibetan Buddhism where many people are sought out who are thought to be reincarnations of past lamas, and they are raised then as a child as that person and then taught by the former students of that lama. So that's what a tulku is. But a tulpa is a thought form creature.
Yeah.
So sometimes these thought form creatures were part of meditation, part of a meditation practice in which you would try to focus yourself mentally to create this image of a deity.
Yes.
And to have this deity speak to you and bless you. And then, this was two-pronged for people. Either they would, experience what they thought was a great spiritual realization from having contact with a deity, or they would see it another way, which is thought of as the more advanced way to see it, which is that it was an illusion and that all of life is an illusion. And so that's what she said. The Tibetans looked on these supernatural phenomena. They didn't see it as supernatural because they saw all of life as illusionary.
Yeah.
And so this illusionary nature of reality would allow such extraordinary things to happen. Now, what's interesting, though, is that, she decided she was going to go into seclusion for a while and try to develop her own tulpa. And so she decided, instead of ruminating on a god or goddess of Tibetan cosmology, as was usually the practice, she would, find some innocuous character to focus on, and so she focused on the image of Friar Tuck.
Yes.
And she was able to create this character to the extent that in her voyages she would often see him traveling alongside her and her retinue of people. She got to the point where other people began to see this character. Even though she didn't articulate what she was seeing, sometimes people would see Friar Tuck in her tent. Of course, they'd wonder about that. No, maybe this was just a convenient way to explain away a boyfriend. My tulpa, he's not real, okay.
You never know.
There's nothing going on in the tent, I assure you. But anyway, it was interesting that she would talk about that in her book, that other people would begin to see him. But then his appearance began to change. He got quite gaunt instead of being that, lovable, fat and jolly character. And then she began to worry about him because, the whole idea of tulpas in Tibetan cosmology is you have to be very careful, that it's very dangerous to create a tulpa. And they often get away from their creators, get into the wild, and then cause trouble, and sometimes even kill their creators. So when she noticed that he was starting to change in appearance, this alarmed her. And then she went about trying to dissolve him. But she says it took 6 months.
Yeah.
To finally rid herself of this image that kept appearing around her, which was witnessed by her and others in her camp.
Yeah. So,
that was one of the most amazing stories. But, in that final chapter, there's a lot more that's talked about. There are other powers of the mind, telepathy, for example, which she claimed to have witnessed from different lamas who would somehow anticipate her arrival, for example, when, of course, nobody told her that she was coming. Or the idea that these powers of the mind could even be used to kill people, that you could assassinate someone by by either impressing some kind of suggestion on their own minds, or, for example, putting your energy in an implement like a knife. And once the person picks up the knife, they stab themselves to death with it. And that's because of those intentions that you either put into the knife or the person. I mean, there's scholars that she says argues about this, like the whole mechanism. But these things, although she said were not common, what she writes about, she says she gathered over more than 10 years of travel. So it's not like something paranormal was happening every day. But when it did, she talked about it and didn't explain it away, even though she said, she was skeptical of some of these practices because there were charlatans who would use this idea, this prevalent idea of super normal powers to get a free ticket to be taken care of by householders in the country their whole lives for free, because they would fake these paranormal abilities. So she knew that fakers exist, but she also acknowledges that the paranormal also exist, although these things weren't miracles to the Tibetan people, but they were a perfectly natural expression of the dreamlike nature of reality.
Yeah. I mean, it is incredible, really, because we're just scraping the surface when it comes to this lady, because she's absolutely embraced life, because she developed such a reputation, Alison, that whenever she's in Asia, it seems anybody who's anybody in the world of Buddhism knows who she is. Her reputation at that point precedes her, which for an outsider coming into this world of magic and mysticism is quite incredible when you look back in it, because she's basically self-taught. I mean, there's a wonderful bit where she meets the 13th Dalai Lama,
right? And
he says to her, "Oh, you're going to have to learn Tibet if you want to Tibetan if you want to do anything over here." So she does.
I know. That's incredible.
And she, I mean, at one point she goes and lives in a cave when she's out there to practice meditation, and I think it's some that they call it, where you go away for a period of reflection.
That's correct.
To recharge yourself. And she also practiced Tummo, which is one of the things about Buddhism I've always been really interested in, which is essentially the way of diverting the body's energy into creating your own heat source, which is why she was able to survive in these frigid and dangerous environments. And I just find it incredible that she was of such character, not only as a woman but as an outsider, which, she had a double barrier to get through by going to these places, and seemed to be accepted by the senior Buddhists out there and the people that mattered. And wherever she went, she was welcomed with open arms and treated as an equal, both spiritually and intellectually.
Right. The whole idea that, she was a foreigner and a woman, it's amazing that she was embraced in the way that she was. But perhaps I think the key to that is, although Buddhism is like all patriarchies, is not, as open to women as we might have liked, although there are many Buddhist nuns, of course. But I think the whole idea was, the reason for more openness was they could acknowledge that maybe she was reincarnated.
Yes.
That she, even though she was a foreigner and a woman, she was reincarnated. So, she was someone who showed advanced appreciation for these things and the ability to learn Sanskrit, to learn Tibetan, to really embrace the people and their language and try to understand it as well as she could, and give it a fair and open a view as she could. And I think that people that met her realized this. So even though, she was breaking into Lhasa in Tibet, she did have the approval of the 13th Dalai Lama, who said, you go, girl.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not what he said, but he did support her breaking in to his city. Even, he was not there. He was exiled, but he was in support of her going there. So, I mean, that's really amazing to me. And I'm happy that you mentioned Tummo, because one of the things that Alexandra David-Neel does, which is very similar to what Catherine Crowe does, she brings up these paranormal things, these paranormal phenomena that she's noticed, and she asks for science to take a look at them. She asks in her final chapter for science to really explore these psychic phenomena, because there is some reality to them that she has experienced. And tumo, interestingly, is something that we see being studied today, although I don't know that people call it tumo. But certainly Wim Hof, if you know who he is, he has gained extraordinary acclaim as the Iceman.
Yes.
For being able to survive, practically naked in sub-zero temperatures, like climbing Everest, for example, or climbing, Kilimanjaro, climbing different mountains in boots, but barely anything else.
Yes.
In boots and shorts. Yes. That's about it. And being able to teach others to do this through a certain breath work technique. So, and science has studied his extraordinary abilities and is seeing that, yes, indeed, he can survive in these cold temperatures because he is generating, some sort of heat, or he can push off the advance of viruses, for example, because of his breathwork abilities. So, thankfully, tumo is back, and it is being studied scientifically. Although its connection to Buddhism, I don't know that has been established very well in the modern press. But that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'd come across it with stories of monks who go off for their periods of reflection, Alison, and it's that because they basically go and sit in the hills for weeks and basically use tumo as a not just a heat source but a food source as well, as it gives them energy and they survive without sustenance. And there are numerous anecdotal reports of monks, surviving days and weeks without sustenance and heat. So there clearly has to be something to it, because as you say, we come across extraordinary people in normal life who have certain abilities and techniques which break the bounds of what we consider the pain threshold or the breath threshold, that allows people to do things that on face value would seem super normal.
Oh, I completely agree. And really, these are super normal abilities, because, other people die,
Yes.
if they don't know how to do these things. They just die. And, certainly for Wim Hof, in some of his mountaineering expeditions, there have been those people who are from mountaineering associations who are like, don't do this. Don't take these people up this mountain. They're going to die. And it's amazing that they don't. And these are people who know mountaineering and know about the high altitudes and the dangers that are present. And, the fact that he's able to, overcome that and actually teach others to do it. And these things are being articulated by science. I mean, that's an amazing thing that shouldn't be overlooked.
Absolutely.
But it was Alexandra David-Neel who first asked for that. So certainly now that we're able to do that with tumo, maybe we should start looking into other things like tulpas, for example.
Yeah, very much so. It is remarkable, and her story is incredible, because it's how much can you pack into a life, because she basically embraces this part of her life when she's about 40. And there's some wonderful stories. I think when she makes an expedition into China, she's essentially goes to the Forbidden City. She doesn't have room for a camera, or she doesn't want to take a camera in case she gets rumbled, but she's got enough room for a pistol and a purse with a ransom in it, just in case she gets kidnapped.
Right. That's when she entered Lhasa in 1924 in Tibet, that's what she did. She wanted to have, of course, a camera and surveying equipment, but she couldn't hide those under her robe. So she had her trusty pistol, and a purse with some money in it, just in case she gets held for ransom, as you said, so that she could buy her way to freedom.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she was just extraordinary about facing adversity and just doing what she wanted, regardless of what people thought of women at the time or foreigners at the time. She was going to trudge ahead.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think, where was it where she was actually rumbled? Because she was in disguise somewhere, and they realised she wasn't local because she got washed every day.
Oh, I don't know.
That's how they realised she wasn't from the area, because she went to the river every day to have a wash, and they said, no, she's clearly not from round here. And then her and her adopted son, they just made a break for it and got away. But that just made me laugh. I was like, well, that doesn't really say a lot about what you think about the people who live there.
Right. Well, it takes all kinds, definitely. That's the thing about her and other notables like Zora Neale Hurston, who would write just what they saw.
Yeah.
And they weren't trying to be PC. They weren't trying to be insulting. They were just trying to just give you the truth. And the truth about any people is that there's positives and negatives to even every individual. None of us walk on water. Well, maybe some of the Tibetans walked on water. I don't. That's a possibility as well. They could do some incredible things, but Zora Neale Hurston was a writer during the time in America that's known as the Harlem Renaissance. So this was a time in New York City where black writers were gaining attention. I mean, even though it was the 1920s and racism was very seriously still at play, African American people started to gain some prominence as novelists, as poets, as entertainers, and singers. And so Zora Neale Hurston was very much a part of this and started out as a writer of fiction. But she also, many people do not know, studied under Franz Boas, who is known as the father of archaeology. So she studied, or not archaeology, sorry, anthropology. So she studied anthropology under him and became, one of his most famous students at that time, because he believed in the value of every culture. He didn't believe in like this social Darwinism, which was so fashionable at the time. He was somebody that believed that all cultures have ugliness and all cultures have beauty. And so we should study all cultures equally. So under his tutelage, she developed this appreciation for anthropology, and he was able to help her get started as an anthropologist. And she was able to actually go from New York back to her home of Eatonville, Florida, where she was raised. And Eatonville, Florida was the first black town. And this was her upbringing was very unusual because, she didn't come up in a place where there was racism, because Eatonville was all African American people, and her father actually was mayor several times, elected mayor, and he actually wrote the laws for the community. So there was this wonderful community in Florida where she came up, and she knew nothing of being seen as a lower class person. That wasn't part of her early thought, and perhaps that's why she was able to ignore it to the extent she was.
Yes.
She was able to return in the 20s to Eatonville, Florida, to start collecting authentic African-American folklore. And she thought this was important because, before her, this wasn't done, or it was done in a way that was racist or not appropriate or maligning. And she just wanted to go and get the real stories.
Yeah.
so there were people in the Harlem Renaissance that would criticize her because she was doing more than just talking about racism. She decided, I'm not going to focus on racism. I want to focus on real African American culture. Yeah. And some people did not like that about her and felt that maybe she wasn't sanitizing it enough. And see, that's not fair, because all people, again, have these different varieties of expression, and we shouldn't, Zora Neale Hurston believed that we shouldn't, look upon these people with any judgment. We should just talk about their beliefs, talk about all beliefs freely without trying to whitewash them, I guess you would say. So she went down and collected all this folklore, but then it got put into her book called Mules and Men. Yeah. Now, Mules and Men would come out in 1933, I believe. So this book was mainly folklore, but then you get to the last chapter, there's a big surprise, because she develops this interest in voodoo and actually travels from Eatonville to New Orleans, Louisiana, and studies under several hoodoo doctors, or what she also calls two-headed doctors. So these were voodoo practitioners in the New Orleans style. So although the book is very funny and irreverent, and it's just folk tales and what her neighbors in Eatonville called big old lies, then her book changes, and at the end it talks about real voodoo practiced in the rural South and in cities like New Orleans, and how it was used by people who could not get justice, who were faced with racism and the inability to access due process or to use the law to gain justice. They would gain justice through conjure or voodoo workings. And so she talks about actually meeting Luke Turner, who was a student of the famous voodoo queen of New Orleans, Marie Laveau. And she becomes his student, and she talks frankly about all the rituals that she went through to become initiated. Yeah. So instead of looking at it from the outside, she begins to look at it from the inside, which is much more compelling to me.
It is a very strange case for Zora, because she's one of those people that I've heard of, but I didn't know that much about her, and I know it surprises me that she seems to have garnered such a split in regards to the way that some people consider her a black heroine, and some people think that she's anything but, and it's a real strange situation, because she's one of those people, because there's a very famous quote where she was talking about racial prejudice, and she said, well, I don't understand it, because why would anybody not want to be in my presence? So she was a very confident woman, and she had a very interesting life, like you say, because she was deeply intelligent and interested in culture and anthropology as well as that. But she was one of those people that really sort of shone a light on this and tried to treat it in a very balanced way, as you refer to, rather than using it to denigrate the population and black culture at that time. She was quite matter of fact about it.
Yes, and I like how you explained it. She does have a famous quote about how she doesn't let this discrimination bother her, because she just can't understand it. She says, how could anyone deny themselves the wonder of being in my presence? I mean, really, she's so confident in that way, and she doesn't understand how people really want to make prejudice their main focus, and certainly it's something that needs to be fought against. And Richard Wright and James Baldwin,
yes,
in the Harlem Renaissance, who were great writers in their own right, but were very critical of her. And that's because, they felt she should have this different focus. And why are you focusing on aspects of African culture which could be so easily maligned by white people?
Yeah.
But she was like, that these are real elements of African culture, and I want to explore authentic African culture and record it for posterity.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, well, that's tough, because this is what it really is, and there's beauty in it, and it doesn't have to be acceptable to white people.
Yeah.
So she had, a very refreshing take on it, I would say. And so she was able to, after these studies in New Orleans, later on, she was able to get a Guggenheim grant to visit and live in Jamaica and Haiti in order to collect folklore there. And so she wrote this book that came out in 1938 called Tell My Horse.
Yes.
And so Tell My Horse is very much about voodoo in Haiti and Jamaica, but it's also about other aspects of life. She talks about the low position of women in Caribbean culture, for example.
Yeah.
She also talks about, many political ideas and the history of Haiti in this book. But, of course, for us, the paranormal is a primary interest. So again, she is quite skeptical. She knows that, sometimes there are charlatans who perpetrate hoaxes, because there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah.
Just like Alexandra David-Neel realized that, of course, there's always a market for charlatans. There is something else beyond that.
Yeah.
So, we need to acknowledge that too today, that yes, there's charlatans everywhere, even in political office, as we well know at this time. But there are also other good people out there, and there are extraordinary phenomena out there that people cannot find an explanation for. And what I love about Zora Neale is when she experienced something she couldn't explain, she wrote about it freely. She didn't try to deny anything. So she does talk about one of my favorite stories in Tell My Horse is about when she traveled to Haiti, and she was staying with many different voodoo priests there. And so there was a voodoo priest who had died in the community, and she was invited to his funeral. Now, there is a ceremony that they practice with these voodoo priests after they die, where they are believed to have a god figure in their head called a loa. And this is one of the expressions of God in voodoo culture, is called a loa. So you would, as a priest, take on one of these loas into your head. And so the idea is, at the end of your life, after death, this loa needs to be removed. And she was shocked when, during the ceremony, this guy is lying there dead, and he suddenly sits up and utters some words, and his eyes are dead. He's very dead. And she, in the book, is wondering aloud, how did they do that? Meaning, was it a trick? She does not know, but, to her, that really startled her. But later on in the ceremony, something even more startling came about, in her opinion, which was, it was thought that these ceremonies could sometimes bring on negative influence, like, demonic spirit would come into the circle of practitioners and try to possess someone. So the idea was that was possible during these removal ceremonies. And she talks about how it was very joyous. There was joyous dancing and singing. And then all of a sudden, just on like the click of a finger, the whole atmosphere of the room switched. So there was this sudden change where there was this joyous atmosphere, and suddenly there was this deep feeling of evil, that evil had entered the room. And everyone, she said, in the room seemed to recognize this simultaneously and backed away from a certain man in the crowd. At which point the voodoo priest came forward and did spiritual battle with the possessor, which was this evil spirit. Now, she does now acknowledge that, of course, if the Hogan, if this voodoo priest is able to expel this spirit, his prominence in the community rises. So there is a reason for hoaxing, but she says, the way that this so organically came about, it seemed like it was a real thing, that this man was really possessed, and how how this manifested in him, and when the voodoo priest was able to exorcise the spirit from him, how the whole face of this man completely changed before her eyes. So to her, that was very startling. There's another story too from Jamaica, a favorite story that I have, of her traveling to the mountains, to a community, and I'm probably going to slaughter this name because I've only read it. I've never heard it spoken. Called Akampong, I believe. And this is in the mountains of Jamaica. And this is the earliest community of escaped slaves who actually escaped their bounds in the 1600s, I believe, and have been living free in the mountains since that time. And since Jamaica was under Spanish influence, and then it was under English influence, and they actually were able to get the English government to sign a peace treaty with them. Yes, that's how powerful they became. And so this community, and many of these escaped slave communities in both Haiti and Jamaica are called Maroons. That's their traditional name. So she went to visit this oldest Maroon community in Jamaica, and because she wanted to collect the folk knowledge there. And she met this person who she calls a medicine man there, and he is unnamed, but he is introduced to her by the leader of the community. And so one night they're just sitting out on the porch, in the middle of this jungle, essentially, this mountainous jungle area. And so the medicine man is regaling her with stories of, different medicines, different plant medicines, and how he uses them. And so she's taking notes, and at one point, she is very irritated and says something about the damn jungle frogs, how loud and annoying they are, because she's hanging on this practitioner's every word and trying to write it down. And because she has a whole chapter in this book about traditional medicines and poisons called graveyard dirt and other poisons. So, and oftentimes a poison is just the dosage, you know, it's a medicine until it's not anymore. So she was talking to this individual, and she exclaims about how she just wishes the frogs would shut up. And then he says, "Oh, really? You want the frogs to shut up? Well, I can help you with that." And the leader of the community, who is sometimes at odds with this medicine man because they both vie for leadership of the community. But he admits, no, if he says he can do it, he can do it. So Zora says, okay, you can do it. Let's see it. Let's see what you got. And so she asked him to silence the frogs, and he stands up, takes a deep breath, raises his arms, and all the frog orchestra, this huge frog orchestra resonating throughout the forest, stops immediately. And she is aghast. She cannot believe that has happened. But she's happy because they can continue on their conversation, which they do for at least another hour or so. And then he says, okay, so I will turn them on again. But you will know when I ask them to recommence, because I will whistle. I'm going to walk down the lane past a certain house, and then I'll whistle, and then you'll see that all the sound comes thundering back, which he does. Which he does. He somehow shows that he has complete control of the frogs, of the jungle, and there's no accounting for it. And she doesn't account for it. She just said, you know what? This is what happened. So to me, that's an amazing experience that she had. And there are many more stories she has of the different wonders that she experiences in Jamaica and in Haiti. And one of the things you might want to talk about before we end this conversation is her experience with authentication zombies.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so many people are familiar with the 1985 book known as The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Yes.
So that was a book by one of my favorite guys, Wade Davis. And there's also a very sensationalist movie which came out at the same time, directed by Wes Craven from Nightmare on Elm Street fame.
Yep.
And it's called by the same name, The Serpent and the Rainbow. Now, I did rewatch it recently, and interestingly, I've found through reading this book, Tell My Horse, and then rereading The Serpent and the Rainbow, found that there are actually some surprising elements of truth in the movie, although Wade Davis was never turned into a zombie. There are different elements that you see, the way that certain ceremonies are portrayed, or, the zombie formula is portrayed, which have some authenticity. So I was really surprised to see that they kept some of that in there while weaving a fantastical horror story around it. But before Wade Davis, it was Zora Neale Hurston who first gave the zombie idea from folklore expression authentically. She was the first one to write about it in a non-sensationalist way as a real phenomena, although it would go largely ignored. And I'm happy to see that Wade Davis did actually acknowledge her in The Serpent and the Rainbow. I can read a little bit of a passage here where he talks about Zora and what she was able to do. He said that, again, she was the first person actually to bring this to attention in literature. And let's see, she remained with this zombie, a reputed zombie, for a day at a local hospital. She had heard many stories of zombies in Haiti and about and knew about the terrible fear that people had that after death they would be resurrected and turned into this thoughtless slave creature, and have no will of their own left, and just be sold into a life of endless servitude. So there was so much fear that people would adopt these elaborate protections to try to keep their loved ones from being taken. So if someone died, people in the family would often cut the body open just to make sure the person was dead, to finish them off, because the idea of real death was less terrifying than this idea of becoming a zombie after death and losing all your human dignity. So they would often, if they didn't use mechanical means like cutting into the body to kill it, they would also poison the body sometimes. Or my favorite is they would booby trap the body in such a way that the body would be holding a knife or some other weapon, and when the evil voodoo priest called a bokur would open the casket, the knife would come out and stab him through some kind of involuntary motion, some mechanical contrivance. And I thought that was really funny. I mean, sad, because just think about, your loved one has died, and then you have to do such terrible things to the corpse, just to make sure that they are always at rest. So she actually found a zombie, and this zombie, through her contacts in Haiti, the zombie's name, she was a woman named Felicia Felix Mentor, and she had died back in 1907. She was a married woman who had a little boy and was suddenly taken ill and then died and was buried. And then people didn't realize anything was amiss until 29 years later, where this naked woman is found wandering on a roadside. And she was able to remember enough to direct authorities to return her to her family farm, where she was then identified by her brother. So Zora was able to meet this woman at a hospital where she then lived out the remaining days of her life, because she was not able to recover her faculties. And she was not really even able to tell much of what happened, but you could see from her reaction to when people approached, you can imagine what her life might have been like, because she, when someone approached, would cover her face, grab a branch from a tree, and act like she was sweeping up, like she was a good and busy slave, and there was no reason to beat her. So the life of this woman must have been horrible, and Zora was haunted by Felicia's dead eyes and the whiteness around them, which made the eyes look as if they had been burned with acid. But the thing about Zora, not only was she able to take the first picture of a zombie, this Felicia Felix Mentor, this picture which appears in her book, Tell My Horse, but she was also able to talk to the doctors there, and came up with this hypothesis that it was a drug. It wasn't any kind of paranormal practice, but it was really a drug that was used to make the people appear to be dead, and then you were able to resurrect them later and sell them into slavery. Now, so she developed this hypothesis, but Wade Davis said, unfortunately, nobody believed her. For example, she later wrote that she and the attendant physician discussed at great length the theories of how zombies came to be. It was concluded that it is not the case of awakening the dead, but a matter of a semblance of death induced by some drug known to a few. Some secret probably brought from Africa and handed down generation to generation. the men know the effects of the drug and the antidote, it is evident that it destroys part of the brain which governs speech and willpower. And the victim can move and act and do work, but cannot formulate thought. And he says that if people would have paid attention to the book Tell My Horse, they maybe would have been able to discover the solution to the zombie mystery 50 years before he did.
Yeah.
So he does give her that credit, and still she's largely unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness. I mean, it is one of those things, because I've seen that photo, Alison, and it's a haunting image.
Yes. And it's interesting. I'm going to do a video on my YouTube channel, Paranormal Women, A Hidden History, coming up, comparing Tell My Horse to Wade Davis's book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, because they come to very different conclusions about the secret societies of Haiti and the purpose of zombification. You know, for Zora, it was very much an economic thing where these Bokurs maybe, benefited from the slave labor that was created. But Wade Davis argues that it's a punishment and it's a type of judicial system, that these people are punished for some terrible sin against the community, and that's why they're turned into zombies. It's a terrible deterrent that keeps the society in line. But you might wonder, then, why would a young mother like Felicia Felix Mentor be subjected to such terrors? What sin could she have committed that would warrant such a brutal punishment? Yeah,
absolutely. Which is another set of questions and investigation in itself, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. So there's so many more women, and there's so many more stories to tell about these women that we've talked about in our interview today. So that's why I'm really excited about the new channel, because these are untold stories that people are really going to want to hear. There's more to come. Certainly I need to talk about Houdini's Ghostbuster Rose Mackenberg in future episodes, and the statistician of the paranormal Eleanor Sedgwick from the Society for Psychical Research. Yep. And there's many more women of today as well that are active in parapsychology, for example, that aren't widely known about. And I think knowing this history and knowing about parapsychology and the women that are active in it today is just going to enrich our practice of paranormal research, and it's free. So I would like everybody to come on over to my channel. It will have a custom URL shortly, but I would suggest that everybody visit my Facebook site, which is facebook.com/Fortean-Writer, which is named after Charles Fort. Maybe I need to rethink that. But it's Fortean-Writer is FORTEAN WRITER. So facebook.com/Fortean-Writer. I'll be remembering to publish all the videos there as I upload them to my YouTube channel.
Fabulous. Well, I'll make sure I've got all the links in all the show notes so everybody can track it down as well. So, Alison, it's been absolutely fabulous to dive into this. Like I say, I've watched the first couple of episodes that you've put up. Absolutely brilliant. Your infectious enthusiasm for this subject just drives them along. So I look forward to what else you've got in store, and I will always be delighted to speak to you about anything you wish. So thank you as always for coming back and joining me today.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just elated at your boundless interest. I think every paranormal researcher should be as open to history as you are, and learn from it as you have. I think that's incredible. So thanks again for always being interested in what I have to deliver.